Hello, this is Julie from Honey Hoolies Designs, and today we're going to be having a look at adding beads to knitting. So quite subtle in this example, but you can see that there's just a small scattering of beads in here. Now, using beads like this that are quite a close match to my yarn give me just a little bit of sparkle without being super in my face, but they really do add such a lovely dimension to knitting. In this case, they're just enhancing and adding to a reasonably simple lace design. You know, it's just adding to the stars. A little sparkle with stars kind of makes sense, right? But you can also use them to create an image or to add a real extra pop of color and sparkle. I look at that. So by using these iridescent and silver lined purpley blue beads on such a pale yarn gives a super high contrast and allows me to create, as you can see here, a pattern within the pattern. So we've got some diamonds within the plain stockinette. Now to do this, you're going to need some beads. I just like to keep them in a simple plastic container or a wee tin that I have if I'm using multiple sets of beads for different projects. This makes it easy to obviously seal them up when I'm done so that my cats can't knock them all over the floor and we're stepping on them and hunting around for them. But it's also a good way for me to be able to pick them up using a hook. Now, you can use a beading hook like this one, or you can use a very small crochet hook. So I recommend 0.8 mil, but sometimes a 1 millimeter hook will also work. There are also products out there like the Beadle needle, which is essentially this portion of my hook, but longer. It doesn't have the handle that this one has. It's just the wire with a couple of little loops of rubber. It's stoppers at either end. There are other similar to that products out there as well, and they all work beautifully. The advantage of one that is just the thin wire is that you can put you can load it, right? You can put lots of beads along the neck of that and have it ready, which is really handy if you're doing a row of knitting that has a lot of beads on it. Crochet hooks will probably allow you to pop, say, 4 or 5 along the end because they only have a small portion of the neck that is narrow enough for the beads. This one allows me to put quite a few on here, but also gives me a nice handle that is easy to hold. I'm just going to load up a few beads on here to show you what I mean by loading it up. So I've popped 5 on here, and as you can see, I could put quite a few more, but 5 will do for this particular row. Now it's hard to see because this one is very fine, but you can see there's just the tiniest of hooks at the end there, and we're going to use that to pick up our stitch of yarn on our needle. I'm going to let a bead fall down off here and onto our stitch as we work it. It's actually that simple to use a hook for beading our knitting. So I'm just going to work up to where I want to pop my bead. Now sometimes the pattern will ask you to put a bead on before knitting the stitch and sometimes after knitting the stitch. Now the reason you might do it one way versus the other is simply where it locates the bead in the row of knitting. So if you do it before, then the bead is going to sit lower, and if you do it after, the bead's going to sit slightly higher. Either way, the bead will be locked in to our knitting and it's not going to go anywhere. So this is actually the stitch that I want to put my bead on, and for this side I'm going to put it on after I've knit the stitch. So I've just knit the stitch exactly like I normally would, and I'm just going to leave it towards the tip there. Then I'm going to grab my hook and I'm going to slide it in through the stitch, so I've just caught that stitch there and it can't go anywhere. And then I'm going to pop let the yarn sort of get locked into the hook there so it can't pop off, and then push a bead over the edge and onto both legs of that stitch so it's really locked in there, and then put the stitch back on my needle, and then I just pull my thread so that pull my yarn so that that's snug again the way it should be, and that bead is then locked in, and then I just knit my next stitch just like normal. No different to if I hadn't beaded the previous stitch. So that's how to do it when you're beading after knitting. If I was to bead the stitch before knitting, I simply work up to before the stitch that I want to add a bead to, and again I'm just going to put my hook through that stitch, slip it off the needle, push a bead down over it, put the stitch back onto the needle, and now I would knit it just like normal. So I'm just going to work across to my next location here for my next bead, one more. So I'm going to bead this one after knitting. So this is the stitch that I want to have a bead on it. Pick up my hook, I'm just going to push a bead up in preparation, and I'm just sliding the hook end under that, or into that stitch, letting the bead fall down over, and then giving it a little pull just to pull it snug where it should be. And then I'm going to work to before the stitch I want to bead this time, because I'm going to bead this one before I knit it. So I want to bead this stitch here. So I'm going to just push my bead up to get ready, pop the hook through the stitch so that the stitch is caught on that needle, pop the bead down over it, pop the stitch back onto the needle, lots of popping, pop it back on there, and then knit it just like normal. And now I'll knit to the end, and we'll have a look at how beading it before or after has affected where it sits in the knitting. As long as you're consistent and do what the pattern says, it doesn't matter. It's truly just up to what the pattern tells you to do, because that'll be where the designer wanted the bead to be. But you can see that when I've beaded it after, it's sitting higher in the knitting than when I've beaded it before. And that's just because when you bead it before, it's going on to the row that is currently sitting on your needle rather than the row you're actually working right now. And when you bead it after, it's sitting on the row that you're working right now. And so you can see, as long as you're consistent, everything lines up beautifully. It's only when you start doing some before and some after, and maybe that's what the designer wants. Maybe they're creating that a more staggered look like that. That could be, quite creative and allow for some really interesting effects. You could create more of a perfect line. So you can see I've got a row in between each of mine here. So there's a gap, but that would let you really stack them quite nicely. Something to play with. And that is beading with a crochet hook. For my next row, I would just work that no differently to any other row. It would just be a purl row across there. I would just have beads on two of my stitches along that row. You just pretend they're not there and carry on, really. There's nothing at all to it. So that is beading with a hook. And remember, a plain crochet hook from a big box store is perfectly fine as long as it's small enough to go through the hole in your bead, sorry. I've used size 6 seed beads here. I find these are a really good size for both lace weight and fingering / 4-ply yarn. They work quite nicely on both, and the yarn will fit through the hole in both of those. Just try to choose a high quality bead like Miyuki or Delica. The Japanese seed beads do tend to be better than some of the other brands out there. Avoid plastic ones if possible, simply because plastic. Look for glass beads, silver lined, sparkly, you know, iridescent effects on them, whatever tickles your fancy. That part doesn't matter. It's all about the size. Size 6 seed beads, preferably glass. Bead your knitting. You got this.